It almost sounds entirely made up. A cursed Apache death cave, a zoo in the middle of the desert, and a wild man named Chief Crazy Thunder who shot a man in cold blood. But this is all true, and it's only part of the wild history that makes up Two Guns, Arizona. The town of Two Guns arguably has some of the most wild stories of any ghost town from that era, and that's why I'm excited to share it with you guys today. The ghost town of Two Guns in Arizona is quietly tucked away off the infamous Route 66. Outside of a few highway signs, Two Guns can easily be missed, but this unassuming stretch of land holds more than 900 years worth of history. Before Two Guns was, well, Two Guns, the area was originally settled by Native Americans. Archaeologists have found relics and artifacts on that land dating back all the way to 1050. And geographically, this makes a lot of sense. The plot of land sits right on the edge of what is now known as Anderson Canyon, which would have been flush with fresh water hundreds of years ago. And with clean water being a rare commodity in the Arizona desert, this would have made a perfect place to settle. Outside of the natives living in the Two Guns area, not much is known about its early history. There is, however, one story that has stuck throughout the years, and that is the tale of the Apache Death Caves. It all started in 1878 when a raiding party of Apache natives were riding along the Colorado River, looking for an encampment to plunder. After a short time, they found a small village of Navajo people living near the riverside, and in their eyes, this was the perfect target. Without warning, the Apache raiders began to slaughter the men, women, and children of the camp, leaving only 3 girls alive, in which they took prisoner. In total, 25 people were slain in the massacre, and the Apaches retreated into the darkness with the looted resources and kidnapped girls. Word of this attack traveled quickly to Navajo tribe leaders, and soon a group of trackers were dispatched to find who committed such a heinous act. The assailants' trail grew cold as their tracks disappeared into what's now known as Canyon Diablo. Determined to bring these raiders to justice, the Navajo scouts pushed further south, trying to find any hint of where they could have gone. After hours of searching along the canyon, one scout noticed a thin veil of smoke coming up from the ground near the base of a ravine. The Navajo scouts quietly inspected the area. They heard voices and saw a fire below. The raiders were hiding in a nearby cave. And just like the attack against their people, the Navajo struck the Apaches with no warning. They quickly set fire to one of the 2 only entrances of the cave, and with the fire raging, there was only one other way out, and that was being guarded by Navajo scouts who had their bows at the ready. Screams echoed out into the valley as the smoke quickly filled the caves. Desperate for air, some of the Apaches tried escaping by climbing their way to the top, but they were shot down one by the waiting Navajo tribe. And after a while, the screaming stopped. When the smoke cleared and the flames died down, a total of 42 Apaches were found dead. They were stripped of their gear, and their bodies were left in a cave, serving as a mass grave. The Navajo scouts, however, were too late, and the 3 girls who were kidnapped were killed just hours earlier. From that point on, no other tribes would claim that cave, as it was deemed cursed. Folklore started to circulate about angry spirits, Apache raiders, haunting the cave, their souls trapped beneath the rocks, doomed to relive their fiery death time after time again. White settlers would hear this story and would write this off as Native American superstition, but still conveniently avoid the area. That is, until a group of convicts would use this same place as a hideout from the law. Many years before Two Guns would actually become a settlement, the Santa Fe Railroad was burrowing its way north across the Arizona desert. And like most railroad work, it ended up getting delayed, and eventually, the loose town of Canyon Diablo was built to support the railroad workers. This settlement quickly became known for its drunken violence, shootouts, and rampant street gambling. As the railroad was finished, the town of Canyon Diablo was just getting started, and so was its rowdy residents. In 1889, a train loaded with valuables was just too much of a temptation for 4 bandits to pass up. The 4 robbed the train as it stopped in Canyon Diablo, and they fled on horseback with over $100,000 in bills, countless amounts of silver, and bags of jewelry. The law was quick on their tail, but not quick enough. The bandits were apprehended a few days later, but almost none of the loot was ever recovered. On his deathbed, years after being released from prison, one of the thieves admitted that their guns and much of the stolen cash and silver was buried in Canyon Rim, just outside of Two Guns. To this day, the treasure has never been recovered, and the area remains popular with treasure hunters some 200 years later. And all of this is taking place before Two Guns was even considered a real town. It wasn't until 1922 that Two Guns, Arizona became a real place. Earl and Louise Cundiff purchased the land now known as Two Guns for a modest $1,000. And they had grand visions for the property. They built a gas station, a small store, and a restaurant for travelers headed west. Remnants of the gas pump and storefront are still visible to this day. But things took a strange and morbid turn when a man by the name of Harry Miller leased some of the property from the Cundiffs in 1925. After the lease agreement was signed, Miller soon announced that his new name was Chief Crazy Thunder, and he wildly began construction on his newly acquired land. Maybe it was the desert heat that got to him, or maybe he'd always been a little off. In a short span, Miller had erected several storefronts, and oddly enough, an entire zoo. Crude cages and pens were constructed from chicken wire and homemade bricks. The zoo was home to everything from mountain lions to snakes, along with birds and cougars. But it gets even weirder. Miller had found the Apache death cave and completely cleaned it out. In a small store at the base of the cave, he sold the slain Apache skulls as souvenirs to tourists. He would then also open up the cave for tours, for a fee of course. Lighting was installed in the cave, and guests were led through the chamber where the 42 Apaches were killed. At the end of this delightful tour, Miller had conveniently placed soft drinks and food at the end of the cave. What an entrepreneur. Business was steady until about 1926, when the road Two Guns was located on was renamed to the one and only Route 66. That same year, Miller and Cundiff got in a fight about their lease agreement, and in a rage, Chief Crazy Thunder, or Miller, shot Cundiff dead in cold blood. Surprisingly, Miller was acquitted for all charges. Months later, Miller's storefront mysteriously caught on fire, and only after a few short weeks, Miss Cundiff built a large trading post on the property. Was this coincidence or an attempt to drive Miller out? Either way, Miller was not happy she was diverting his traffic, and he drugged Miss Cundiff through an expensive and lengthy court battle. During the case, he claimed that he was the original founder of Two Guns and that the land was rightfully his. During this time, his storefronts and zoo were continuously vandalized. His flamboyant signs advertising his zoo placed along Route 66 were either ripped down or destroyed. Miller also had mounting legal issues, which he went to great lengths to cover up. Or so rumor has it. All this pressure led to Miller fleeing the state in 1930, leaving his zoo and roadside attractions abandoned. Miller's businesses passed through many hands before eventually going bust. The zoo held on all the way up until 1950, until the animals were transferred to other enclosures elsewhere in the area. In 1960, a few more modern service stations were built along with the hotel. The zoo did so well in the past, another budding businessman tried to give the zoo another shot, but it ultimately failed. Two Guns was just barely hanging on by a thread. That is until the main service station burned down in 1971. And that seemed to be the catalyst. Everything else began to rapidly decline around it. Soon, everyone had left and everything was left behind. Since then, no one has tried to build in Two Guns ever since. Two Guns is truly a ghost town like no other, and I really can't think of any other place you can explore with such a vast amount of history in one spot. Was it the decline of tourism that led to the failure of Two Guns? Or was it a 200-year-old Apache curse? You'll just have to go there yourself and find out. If you enjoyed the video, hit the subscribe button in the center of the screen so YouTube shows you more videos just like this.